Earlier this week, I mentioned that the laws of the Torah were taught to the children of Israel over time during the 40 years in the desert. And yet, I've also mentioned in the past that we have teachings that say that the Torah was known to generations before the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, and that our patriarchs and other righteous people actually learned it and even lived by it. Now, that sounds kind of contradictory, so let's go ahead and demystify this. So the Torah makes it clear that there were laws known to mankind that were given by God before the laws given at Mount Sinai. Now, these are both the Noahide laws, which are obligatory upon all human beings, and there was also knowledge of the 613 commandments that the children of Israel would be obligated in when they stood at Mount Sinai. Now, of course, you probably want some proof of what I'm saying. So first off, there obviously was a code of morality that was in play for all of humankind, because if there was no code of morality, how could God have held Cain responsible for murdering his brother if there was no prohibition against murder? How could God have punished the generation of the flood if there was no prohibition against immorality and violence? And how could Avimelech be accused of committing adultery by God if there was no law prohibiting it? So obviously there were laws that were in play at that point in time before Sinai. Those were the Noahide laws that every human being has always been expected to live by. But we actually see that before the giving of the Torah, there was knowledge of more than just the 7 Noahide laws. There was actually knowledge of the 613 commandments. And one of the ways that we can see this is by looking at the story of Noah. Noah was told by God to bring both unclean and clean animals into the ark. Now, how could he have known what were clean and unclean if the Torah was only given many, many years later, at which point God told us which animals are clean and which are not clean? So obviously some of that information was known to people before the giving of the Torah. Now, in the Torah, it tells us very specifically that Abraham himself kept all of God's commandments, and he kept all the entire Torah. Now, this was something that he also instructed his family members to follow in. But it's important to note that only when they were in the land of Israel did they hold themselves to the super high standard of keeping all the commandments of the Torah. Outside of Israel, they didn't hold themselves to that extremely high standard. Because before that time, keeping the laws of the Torah was not obligatory. It was only voluntary. Now, bear in mind, when we say that the patriarchs learned the Torah and they kept the Torah, it doesn't mean that they were sitting and studying the books of Genesis and Exodus and so on and so forth. The books of the Torah were only written towards the end of Moses' life in the desert. Up until that time, everything was orally transmitted. When we say that they learned Torah, it means that they were engaged with the will and the wisdom of God. And this information was handed down from generation to generation, from one righteous person to the next righteous person. We had Noah, Shem, Abraham, and his family. They were all keeping the Torah. So when the children of Israel entered the land of Egypt, Jacob actually sent Judah ahead of him in order to establish a house of study where the children of Israel would be able to engage with the holy words of the Torah. Now, they were originally settled inside of Goshen, which was removed from the general populace of Egypt, and they were able to keep to themselves, to learn the Torah, and to observe their rituals. Unfortunately, over the course of time, however, some of the children of Israel began venturing into the general populace and learning from and engaging with the ways of Egyptian society, and that began to affect them. There were, sadly, children of Israel who assimilated largely into Egyptian culture. And unfortunately, we've seen that when this begins to happen, there's automatically a rise in anti-Semitism, and the children of Israel ended up becoming enslaved. Everybody except for the tribe of Levi. The tribe of Levi stayed true to their mission. They stayed learning and teaching Torah, and they actually were not enslaved inside the land of Egypt, as were the rest of the children of Israel, which is how Moses and Aaron were able to come and go freely from Pharaoh's palace. Now, because there was this high level of assimilation, many of the children of Israel were just not keeping, and they were not connected to the Torah of their forefathers. So even when it came time to leave the land of Egypt, many of the children of Israel had to be introduced to these concepts. How do we know this? Even the command that was explicitly commanded to Abraham that he should circumcise his progeny, many of them were not keeping. That's why Moses was told to tell the children of Israel that nobody uncircumcised would be able to eat from the Passover lamb. So right before the Exodus, there was this mass circumcision. So when the children of Israel came out of the land of Egypt, for many of them, the whole idea of the Torah and mitzvahs was pretty brand new. Moreover, they actually had to engage in the study of these commandments over time because the endeavor itself is holy, but also practical application. Even though they had heard about these concepts, they had to see how it applied to their daily life, and they had to learn how to take these laws and to actually live with them. sometimes situations would come up that Moses would actually go back and ask God how to handle it, such as the story with the daughters of Tzalafchad, who requested the inheritance of their father, or the story of Pesach Sheni, in which men missed the ability to bring the Passover sacrifice and they still wanted to engage in this commandment. So Moses had to go and ask God how to handle the situation. And this whole method of knowing how to apply laws to our very lives continues until this very day. This is the kind of stuff that we're engaged with, because the Torah doesn't change, but society changes. So sometimes we have to have ways of navigating the world. So we have to learn how to apply the law to our daily situation. Most importantly, to know about the laws being given to the children of Israel in the desert is that at that point in time when they stood at Mount Sinai, that was when they became obligated in them. Before that time, they were mostly voluntarily. But after they stood at Mount Sinai, there was no wiggle room. They were supposed to be doing this. So I hope that helps demystify this topic.